Princess Zyra sat on the cold, rocky ground, staring at the dark sky above. The twin moons of Zoran V shone dimly, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying the scent of dust and death. She pulled her torn cloak tighter around her shoulders, but it did little to stop the bitter cold. She had always known her family never loved her, but she never thought they would abandon her like this. "This is where you belong," her father, Emperor Vorzul, had said before leaving her on this dead world. "The weak do not deserve a place in the Empire." Zyra clenched her fists, her sharp nails digging into her palms. She was not weak. She had trained, studied, and fought to prove herself. But no matter what she did, she was never enough. In her father's eyes, strength meant cruelty. Zyra refused to be like him. And now, she was paying the price. A distant roar made her heart jump. She turned her head, scanning the horizon. Something was moving in the darkness. She could see the faint outline of a massive beast, its glowing red eyes locked onto her. Her body tensed. She had no weapon, no armor, nothing to defend herself. The creature stepped closer. Its thick, scaled body rippled with muscle, and its claws scraped against the rocks. It let out a deep growl, saliva dripping from its fanged mouth. Zyra's breathing grew faster. She knew she couldn't outrun it. This was how she would die. Alone. Forgotten. Then, out of nowhere, a bright flash of light lit up the sky. A sharp, cracking sound echoed through the cliffs. The beast let out a painful roar and stumbled back. Another shot rang out, and the creature turned and fled into the darkness. Zyra blinked, confused. What just happened? Then she saw him. A figure stepped out from behind a jagged rock, holding a weapon that glowed faintly in the dark. He was tall, wearing a rough jacket and worn-out boots. His face was partly hidden by a scarf, but his sharp eyes were locked onto her. A human. Zyra had heard stories about them. The Empire saw humans as nothing more than scavengers, survivors of a broken world. They were not considered warriors, not considered a threat. And yet this one had just saved her life. He lowered his weapon but did not step closer. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough but calm. Zyra hesitated. No one had ever asked her that before. Not her family, not her people. For the first time in her life, someone cared if she was alive. She swallowed hard and nodded. The human reached out a hand. "Come on. It's not safe here." Zyra stared at his hand. Everything she knew told her not to trust him. But right now, she had no choice. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. And in that moment, her fate changed forever. Zyra followed the human through the dark, rocky landscape. Her legs ached, her body was weak, but she forced herself to keep moving. She had no other choice. If she stayed behind, the beasts would return. The human moved with confidence, his steps sure and steady. He carried a strange weapon in one hand and a small light in the other. He didn't speak much, only glancing back occasionally to make sure she was still following. After what felt like hours, they reached a small cave hidden between two cliffs. The human stepped inside first, scanning the area. Then he motioned for her to follow. Zyra hesitated. She had never been this close to a human before. The Empire called them scavengers, unworthy of respect. Yet this one had saved her life. He had no reason to, and she couldn't understand why. "Are you coming or not?" the human asked, his voice breaking the silence. Zyra stepped inside. The cave was small but warm. A fire crackled in the center, its soft glow filling the space. Strange metal crates were stacked in one corner, and a sleeping bag lay against the wall. This was his home. He sat down near the fire and removed his scarf, revealing a rough but not unkind face. His dark eyes studied her for a moment before he reached into one of the crates and pulled out a small package. He tossed it to her. "Eat." Zyra caught it awkwardly. She unwrapped the package and found a bar of dried food. It smelled strange, But hunger won over caution. She took a bite. The taste was bland but not unpleasant. The human watched her as he pulled off his jacket. "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Xyra." He nodded. "I'm Ethan." Silence filled the cave. Xyra wasn't sure what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No commands, no insults, just simple words. Ethan tossed a blanket toward her. "You look like you're freezing. Take it." She caught it, staring at him. No one had ever offered her warmth before. "Why did you save me?" she asked finally. Ethan leaned back, resting his arms on his knees. "Why wouldn't I?" Xyra frowned. "Because I am nothing." Ethan snorted. "That's a load of crap." Xyra blinked, surprised by his bluntness. "You're alive, and you needed help. That's enough reason," Ethan said simply. Xyra stared at him. In the Empire, strength ruled. The weak were discarded. No one helped unless they had something to gain. But this human, he was different. For the first time in her life, someone had saved her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She pulled the blanket around her and watched the fire flicker. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, Xyra woke up feeling stronger. The warmth of the fire, the food, and the strange but comforting presence of Ethan had kept the nightmares away. For the first time in a long while, she didn't wake up in fear. Ethan was already outside, checking his weapon. The twin suns of Zorin 5 had begun to rise, bathing the rocky wasteland in golden light. Xyra stepped out of the cave, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Ethan glanced at her. "You sleep okay?" She nodded. "Better than I expected." He smirked. "Good. Because if you're staying, you need to learn how to survive." Xyra frowned. "I already know how to fight." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah. With what?" He gestured at her empty hands. "You have no weapons, no armor. Out here, strength alone won't save you." Xyra's pride flared. She was trained in the royal combat arts. She had spent years mastering the blade, learning to fight like an imperial warrior. But she had no blade now, and against the beasts of this world, her training had been useless. Ethan tossed her a small, curved knife. "First lesson, never go anywhere unarmed." She caught it, feeling the weight in her hands. It was crude compared to the weapons of the Empire, but it was sharp, lethal. Ethan picked up a second knife and twirled it in his fingers. "You're fast, right?" Xyra narrowed her eyes. "Faster than you." Ethan grinned. "Let's see about that." He lunged. Xyra barely had time to react. She dodged, but he was quicker than she expected. His blade stopped just short of her throat. She scowled. "You held back." Ethan shrugged. "Of course. You'd be dead otherwise." Xyra growled and attacked this time. She moved fast, her instincts sharp, but Ethan didn't fight like an imperial warrior. He didn't follow patterns or rigid techniques. His movements were unpredictable, wild, yet controlled. She slashed, but he dodged. She lunged, but he sidestepped. Again and again, he outmaneuvered her. Finally, Ethan caught her wrist and twisted. The knife dropped from her grip, clattering to the ground. He let go and stepped back. "You're strong, but you fight like someone who expects to win. Out here, you don't get that luxury." Xyra clenched her fists. She had trained her whole life, yet this human had defeated her so easily. Ethan picked up the knife and handed it back to her. Lesson 2: expect the unexpected. Xyra stared at him, breathing hard. In the Empire, she had been cast aside as weak. But here, with this human, she had the chance to become something more. She took the knife. "Teach me," she said. Ethan smirked. "Now you're learning." Days passed, and Xyra trained with Ethan. She learned to fight without relying on her old techniques, adapting to his unpredictable style. She learned to move silently, to track prey, and to strike only when necessary. For the first time in her life, She wasn't fighting to prove herself. She was fighting to survive. One morning, Ethan woke her before the suns had risen. Time for your real test. Zyra sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. What test? Ethan handed her a small spear. We're going hunting. Zyra frowned but took the weapon. I thought you said this planet was too dangerous to wander alone. Ethan smirked. That's why I'm coming with you. They moved through the rocky terrain, keeping low. Zyra followed Ethan's lead, stepping where he stepped, watching the way he scanned the area. It reminded her of how Imperial scouts moved. Always alert, always ready. After an hour of searching, Ethan stopped and pointed. There. Zyra followed his gaze and saw it, a Vornak. It was a six-legged reptilian beast, its scales blending into the rocks. Its claws could tear through steel, and its jaws were powerful enough to crush bone. She tightened her grip on the spear. How do we kill it? Ethan whispered, aim for the neck. But we need to get closer. Zyra took a slow breath and moved forward. Step by step, she closed the distance. The Vornak remained still, unaware of her presence. She raised her spear, preparing to strike. But then the beast turned, its yellow eyes locking onto her. It hissed, muscles tensing. In a split second, it lunged. Zyra barely rolled aside in time. The Vornak's claws scraped against the rocks where she had stood moments before. She landed hard but quickly got to her feet, gripping the spear tightly. Ethan cursed. So much for sneaking. He pulled out his knife, ready to assist. But Zyra didn't want help. She had trained for this. She had learned. The Vornak charged again, but this time, she was ready. She sidestepped at the last second and drove the spear forward. The tip sliced into the beast's neck, but not deep enough to kill. The Vornak howled in pain and swung its tail. Zyra was thrown backward, hitting the ground hard. The Vornak turned, ready to finish her. Then, a shot rang out. The beast stumbled, a smoking hole in its skull. It collapsed. Zyra turned to see Ethan lowering a small hidden pistol. He walked over and held out a hand. You almost had it. She scowled but took his hand, standing up. I didn't need your help. Ethan chuckled. I know, but I didn't want to cook Vornak meat and patch up your wounds tonight. Zyra looked at the dead beast, then back at Ethan. Despite her frustration, she couldn't deny the truth. She had come closer to victory than ever before. And next time, she wouldn't fail. The fire crackled as Ethan cooked the Vornak meat. The rich scent filled the cave, mixing with the cold night air. Zyra sat nearby, sharpening her knife. The battle still played in her mind. Every move, every mistake. She had improved, but it wasn't enough. You're thinking too much, Ethan said, tossing her a piece of cooked meat. Zyra caught it but didn't eat. I should have killed it myself. Ethan smirked. You almost did. You just hesitated. She clenched her jaw. Back in the Empire, hesitation was weakness. She had been trained to act without fear, yet something inside her had held back. Was it doubt? She sighed and took a bite. The meat was tough but edible. What happens next? Ethan stretched his arms. We keep training. You keep getting stronger. Zyra shook her head. That's not what I meant. We can't stay here forever. The Empire will send hunters after me. And you're helping a fugitive. Ethan's expression darkened. He stared into the fire, lost in thought. Finally, he said, I know. Silence filled the cave. The weight of their situation was pressing down on both of them. If the Empire found them, they would show no mercy. Zyra looked at him. Why are you helping me, Ethan? You had no reason to. Ethan leaned back, looking at the stars through the cave opening. Because I know what it's like to be thrown away. Zyra's eyes widened slightly. She had assumed he was just a wanderer, a survivor. But there was something deeper. What happened to you? She asked. Ethan chuckled, but it was a bitter sound. Long story. Let's just say the people I trusted decided I wasn't worth keeping around. Zyra understood that feeling too well. She took a deep breath. Then we have something in common. Ethan glanced at her and smiled slightly. Yeah, I guess we do. Then a sound broke the moment. A distant, sharp hum cutting through the night. Ethan tensed. Do you hear that? Zyra's blood ran cold. She knew that sound. Imperial drones. They found us, she whispered. Ethan grabbed his rifle and quickly put out the fire. Time to move. Zyra stood, her heart pounding. She had spent so long running. But now, with Ethan beside her, something had changed. She wasn't just running anymore. She was ready to fight. The humming of the Imperial drones grew louder. Zyra and Ethan moved quickly through the rocky terrain, keeping low. The Empire had finally caught up to them. There was no more time to hide. Ethan checked his rifle. How many? Zyra glanced up, her sharp eyes scanning the dark sky. At least 3 drones. But if they're here, soldiers aren't far behind. Ethan smirked. Good. I was starting to get bored. Zyra gave him a look, but she couldn't help feeling a strange excitement too. For the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting to prove her worth to the Empire. She was fighting for herself. They reached a cliffside, hiding behind the rocks. The drones hovered overhead, scanning the ground with bright blue lights. Ethan pulled out a small device and handed it to her. EMP grenade. Toss it when they get close. Zyra nodded, gripping the device tightly. She waited, heart pounding. Then, she threw the grenade. A bright pulse exploded in the air, and the drone sparked wildly before falling from the sky. Ethan grinned. Nice throw. But before Zyra could reply, a new sound filled the night. Engines roaring. A dropship was approaching. She tensed. They're here. Ethan readied his rifle. Then let's give them a proper welcome. The dropship landed, kicking up dust. The ramp lowered, and armored Imperial soldiers marched out, weapons raised. At the front stood a tall figure, Commander Valen, Zyra's former mentor. Princess Zyra, he called, his voice cold. You have nowhere left to run. Zyra stepped forward, standing tall. I'm not running. Valen sighed. You should not have abandoned your duty. The Empire gave you everything. Zyra's hands tightened into fists. The Empire threw me away. Valen's eyes flicked to Ethan. And this human, you think he can save you? Ethan smirked. I'm just here for the fun. Valen shook his head. You had so much potential, Zyra. But now, you leave us no choice. He raised his hand. Kill them. The soldiers opened fire. Zyra and Ethan dove behind cover as plasma bolts burned through the air. Ethan fired back, taking down 2 soldiers with quick, precise shots. Zyra leaped forward, moving faster than the soldiers expected. She grabbed one by the arm, twisted, and slammed him to the ground. Another came at her, but she dodged and struck his helmet hard, knocking him unconscious. Ethan tossed her a knife. Here, princess. She caught it and spun, slashing at an enemy's rifle, disabling it. Then she turned to face Valen. He drew his sword. You think you can beat me? Zyra exhaled slowly. She wasn't the same weak princess he had once known. She raised her knife. I don't think. I know. They clashed. Valen was strong, but Zyra was faster. Every lesson, every training session with Ethan had changed her. She dodged his strikes, countered his moves, and finally, she saw her opening. With a quick motion, she disarmed him and kicked him to the ground. She pressed the knife to his throat. Valen stared at her, shocked. You've changed. Zyra's grip tightened, but then she pulled back. I'm not like you. Ethan walked up beside her. So, what now? Zyra looked at the fallen soldiers, then at the stars above. She had been exiled, hunted, rejected. But here, with Ethan, she had found something the Empire never gave her. Freedom. She turned to Ethan and smiled. We leave this place together. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive.